with me. And I asked Pat, I said, what did Jesus look like? And she said, well, he was beautiful. He was tall and handsome and had blue eyes and blonde hair. And I said, Pat, have you read your Bible lately? I don't think there's much of a chance that Jesus had blue eyes and blonde hair. And like so many other abductees in the same situation, she said, well, this one did. It worked. Grandma went with him. After all, Jesus said, they're with him. Go to it. Now, these improbable figures that we know are not the dead grandmother, are Michael Jackson, are Jesus himself in these situations, are very often part of what we call the virtual reality technology, where images can be created and perpetrated that feel absolutely as real as you and I feel right here today. And they are very persuasive when you are already under a control. And the one rule of thumb in the abduction encounter, no matter what you think, no matter what you remember, and no matter what you felt, you were under control when it happened. And they controlled how you saw it, and how you felt about it, and what you remember of it. And when you're in that form of controlled state, they can make you think Jesus himself is there, or your dead grandmother's there, or President Clinton wants to have sex with you. All right? Now then, what are they doing? What kinds of exams and procedures are we getting representative reports about? Besides the things you already know pretty well from the literature, like the taking of skin, the taking of hair, the taking of fingernails, and body fluid samples, and sperm, and ova, and fetuses, and this is what you've been told about for the most part goes on. There are other widely reported exams and procedures that I think have very little or nothing to do with crossbreeding our spiritual agenda. For one thing, most every single abductee has what's called a mind scan performed on them. The creature gets right up in your face, the eyes take over control, and you are scanned. In fact, one little girl said, they filmed my soul. Now, this is out of the mouths of babes, and we ought to listen to these babes a lot more than we normally tend to do when it comes to this phenomenon. For women, almost every one of the abductees that are female undergo gynecological procedures of various sorts, sometimes painful, sometimes not. But the result and the after effects are that many, many, many abductees, much higher than the national average, suffer from extremely severe gynecological problems after being used by the aliens in these procedures. In fact, we have a report very recently of a 10-year-old girl who just had to have a hysterectomy because of what they had done with her. It's getting younger and younger. There are also many implantations performed on abductees. You've heard about the little BB probes that are put up the nose and go penetrate into here like my husband had when he and his best friend were abducted when they were 12. As often, or maybe even more often, they use behind the eye, as you heard with Barbara's presentation today. They take the eye out, they do the implant behind it, put the eye back in. They also put them in through the ear. Most recently, they've begun putting them behind the ear into the base of the brain. And very often, they go into the spine at some point, ranging from the base of the neck all the way down to the bottom of the spine. All right, what does this have to do with crossbreeding or spiritual elevation, you might wonder, as I do. Many abductees report the brain surgery, like Beth, when they opened her head and took out her brain. This report is as common as the sperm and ova taking, although you don't hear about it as often. And people who have this happen use almost the same phrase. They opened my head and took out my brain. Word for word. I can repeat it on tape after tape, the same scenario. Certain kinds of instruments are repeatedly reported as part of these procedures. You know about the little light bar or light wand that's used to scan over the body. This is very, very common. You know about the little small box, usually a little black box, that's reported in many of these scenarios. We don't know up until this point, perhaps we know now, but we did not know what this little black box was all about. In Masquerade of Angels, I think you'll find some information that may shed light on what that little black box is all about. And I don't think you're going to be real happy with it, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway if you read the book. A long needle device, sometimes into the brain, sometimes into the abdomen, sometimes into other areas, even into between the toes, is reported repeatedly. And then, of course, there's the infamous alien dentist chair. How many of you have been in that? You're in the chair, the equipment pulls down from overhead, and you get the little laser type or razor type or probe type device that is used in any number of areas on the body. These are very similar from report to report to report. Abductees are very frequently given an unknown liquid to drink. No explanation for what this is about. Sometimes they're given a substance to swallow or to eat with no explanation of what it is. And the results of these liquids and these pills or substances are varying. Sometimes it's dizziness, loss of consciousness, extreme nausea, and sexual stimulation. All of these are frequently reported from these substances we are made to ingest. What are the aliens communicating in these scenarios? Well, very often they don't communicate a darn thing. You're out, you don't get to ask questions, they don't answer any questions, they do the procedure and you're back home and that's it. But they do sometimes communicate certain things. Sometimes it's merely directions. Don't be afraid. Yeah, sure, don't be afraid. Lie still. Don't touch certain things. They have told them not to touch aliens, not to touch things on the ship, not to touch the ship itself. Don't touch. These are some of the kinds of directions abductees are given in communications. Many abductees are given certain other kind of communications. You are special. You are chosen. You're the golden child. You have a mission. And they are told this sort of information, that they are selected for some great honor or mission or task. Sometimes the aliens communicate a lot of information about the origin of the human species, and you know what it mostly says? We made you. We altered what you were. We changed you. We own you. You're our product. Sometimes they make a lot of statements about the separation of the soul and the body. And they seem to be doing this more and more lately, stressing, don't be so attached to that physical body. It's just a container. It's just a vessel. Why, it's not important. Now, why do you think they would want to downgrade the physical form that God chose to put us in and tell us it's not important? It was important enough for God to make it. It was important enough that this is how we are born. Why do you think they might be stressing, hey, don't be so attached to that body. It's not really important. You might want to think about why that would be something they want us to believe. Very often they deliver warnings about the current terrible condition of the planet, or about some impending destruction that we're going to bring on ourselves, or that nature is going to bring on the planet, and so on. We get a lot of warnings. And then occasionally there's some weird things like certain musical sounds are heard. Or aliens are heard chattering in their own language, which is incomprehensible to the person. They talk about it as a bird-type sound or a bumbling, buzzing, humming sort of noise that they try to describe, and there's really not a way to do that in human terms. But we sometimes get reports of aliens communicating to each other in a verbal form. All right, now in addition to these exams and procedures that are reported, there's also other kind of activities that abductees report. You probably, some of you here, had some of these. Very often, they have teaching or testing sessions with abductees, from childhood through adulthood. Sometimes, and I have this many, many times reported very specifically, and sometimes in more than one generation in the family, they taught me how to walk through walls. They taught me how to pass through solid objects. They taught me how to use my mind to move objects. They taught me how to affect electrical impulses with my brain. They taught me telekinesis. They taught me levitation. Now, the people are able to perform these things when they're with the aliens, but when they get up the next morning and try to walk through that wall, it doesn't happen. All right? So it seems to only work when you're with the aliens, but they're spending years sometimes teaching people how to pass through solid objects. We do know about the crossbreeding activities. Yes, they take sperm, they take ova, they take fetuses. This is a given. It really does happen. But maybe it's not about crossbreeding. Maybe it's about something else. We might want to talk about that in just a second. I know we're running short on some time, so I want to get down to the nitty-gritty. Often there's an immersion into a pool of liquid that the abductee is forced to inhale, thinking they're going to drown, but they find they can breathe this liquid. Very often they present scenarios or visions of past events in the person's lives or future events on the global scale. They'll show futuristic war scenes, or the planet blowing up, or the moon exploding, or terrible floods, or earthquakes, or chaos as a future event. And this is used as part of the programming. And they often tell us, you're going to have a job to do when this happens. And finally, there is the great variety of sexual activity that is perpetrated upon abductees. And I'm talking almost every variety of the sex act that you can imagine, with aliens, with things we don't even know what they are, and with abductees among abductees. They may take an abductee from one place and an abductee from another and force them into sexual activity together. They don't know each other. They don't know if that person has AIDS. They don't know what the condition is, but they are forced into sexual activity, and this is repeatedly done. In fact, in one case in here that's so heartbreaking, Lisa, the woman in Alabama, last year was abducted, and there was another man, another abductee, that she was forced to engage in a sexual act with, and the man apologized to her very, very deeply. He said, "I'm sorry, they make me do this. They've been taking me since I was a child. I can't help it. I'm sorry." And again, this is reported in many different instances. And I'm not just talking about genital intercourse. I'm talking about a variety of sexual acts. And I'm talking about on people as old as in their 70s and on children as young as 3 years old. In fact, one abductee adult mother of 2 children who was fairly happy with her sexual activity to a certain point, well, she said it was some of the best sex she ever had, was not at all disturbed that she was repeatedly being forced into these sexual encounters until one morning she gets up and her 5-year-old daughter is sexually manipulating the 3-year-old daughter, and aghast she says, "What are you doing?" She says, "Mommy, we're just doing what the little doctors do to us when they come in the bedroom at night." Are they crossbreeding? Are they taking ova from 3-year-old children? I have a problem with this. Now, where do these activities take place? Very often they're right there in your home, in the bedroom, in the living room, in the kitchen, sometimes in the car when you're traveling. Sometimes people are taken aboard what seems to be a UFO craft. Very often they're taken, however, to some facility that is neither in the home nor on the craft. And the reports from people that I call UFO virgins, that is, people who do not study this phenomenon, who very often don't know anybody else has had these things happen, and they wouldn't know Bud Hopkins or John Lear from you or me. That's how little they know. Report identical scenarios, and I want to tell you what these include. They very often include what is clearly an underground facility. And in this underground facility, 3 basic types of activities and setups are reported. The first is what appears to be like a military base, and very often there are humans as well as aliens in this facility, where there are craft and there are activities going on such as a base might have going on. The second commonly reported underground facility is one in which apparently scientific research seems to be carried out, including, again, both alien and human workers. And the third type is what we've come to call the processing plant. And this, again, often has both human and alien personnel working in it. And in this underground processing plant, what we get reported over and over again is a setup in which human body parts are being processed like chicken or beef. They are being flayed, they are being dismembered, they are being drained of blood, they are sometimes reported stacked up like firewood, sometimes hanging, draining, sometimes going down, being dismembered as they go towards some unknown end facility. I don't make it up, and I don't necessarily believe it's real, but I know that it's what they really put in these people's minds. Whether it's virtual reality or reality, why are they doing it? What is the purpose of such a scenario, either real or imagined? Why would they do this to our people? What does it imply? And these are reported, like I said, from UFO virgins as well as from people who are familiar with this field. Hybrid nursery rooms are very, very often reported, often containers that have liquid and fetuses at various levels of growth that often look partially human, partially alien, sometimes right here today. And they are very persuasive when you are already under a control. And the one rule of thumb in the abduction encounter, no matter what you think, no matter what you remember, and no matter what you felt, you were under control when it happened. And they controlled how you saw it and how you felt about it and what you remember of it. And when you're in that form of controlled state, they can make you think Jesus himself is there, or you're dead. This one did. It worked. Grandma went with him. After all, Jesus said, they're with him. Go to it. Now, these improbable figures that we know are not the dead grandmother, are Michael Jackson, are Jesus himself in these situations, are very often part of what we call the virtual reality technology, where images can be created and perpetrated that feel absolutely as real as you and I feel. Grandmother's there. Our President Clinton wants to have sex with you. All right? Now then, what are they doing? What kinds of exams and procedures are we getting representative reports about? Besides the things you already know pretty well from the literature, like the taking of skin, the taking of hair, the taking of fingernails and body fluids, they're with me. And I asked Pat, I said, what did Jesus look like? And she said, well, he was beautiful. He was tall and handsome and had blue eyes and blonde hair. And I said, Pat, have you read your Bible lately? I don't think there's much of a chance that Jesus had blue eyes and blonde hair. And like so many other abductees in the same situation, she said, well, the samples and sperm and ova and fetuses, and this is what you've been told about for the most part, goes on. There are other widely reported exams and procedures that I think have very little or nothing to do with crossbreeding our spiritual agenda. For one thing, most every single abductee has what's called a mind scan performed on them. The creature gets right up in your